This one's good. Donkey Kong Bongos. You could have foot controls with your feet, and you could also have the second set of D-pad controls on your thumb, and all the action buttons on your hand. Hello and welcome to another NihongoGamer video. As you know, on this channel, I'm a big fan of fighting games and using controllers to play fighting games like normal D-pads, or random controllers that we build that have a bunch of buttons on them instead of an arcade stick, or things like you see back there, but have an actual lever to play with them. But I can't decide on my own, which is the actual best controller for winning competitive games. So instead of trying to decide on my own, let's ask the hive mind that is Twitter, because surely they'll know what's the best controller for winning fighting games. So this is the tweet I put up. I said, what's the best controller for winning fighting games? Let's have a look at some of these replies. First up, Joycons for the big brains. I actually did a video when the Nintendo Switch first came out, and I remember trying to play fighting games with these, and obviously, as you can imagine, the difficulty of playing a fighting game with Joy-Cons is that it doesn't have a proper D-pad. You can buy a separate D-pad that you can slide onto your Nintendo Switch like so, but the ones that come with the Nintendo Switch on their own have a split selection of buttons like this. Some of the commands are a little bit harder to do because you can't just like roll your finger. You have to like make sure that you release buttons and press buttons at exactly the right moments. Certain motions that you would normally do, like a fireball, like Hadouken, you actually like tilt the whole controller over its side, whereas if it were staying steady, then you can just use your thumb to press the directions. But if you're holding it like this, then every time you like try to do the rolling motion, the whole controller moves, and so it's all don't play fighting games with Joy-Cons. Now here's the obvious one, the one that's most comfortable for you. The truth is, of course, this is a completely silly question asking what's the best controller for winning fighting games. 50% of it is, of course, choosing the controller that's the most comfortable for you. If you use a controller which is great for somebody else but just doesn't work for your hands or just the way that you sit, then it's not going to be the best controller for you. But at the same time, there are a number of things that have happened as a result of controllers like these coming out and other controllers that are coming out where they actually put the direction buttons on the right side of the controller, and so it will make a whole number of things that used to be quite challenging, I like to say trivial, because normally you would be matching like a lateral motion with a lever and pressing a button, which is kind of like a digital input. But if you have them both as buttons, it's literally just a case of making sure your fingers don't move, and then you just press them at the same time. So of course it's a silly question, what's the best controller for winning fighting games? But at the same time, there are a number of controllers that are coming out that offer a large number of shortcuts. I say yes, I would call them shortcuts that you just simply cannot do on other controllers. Oh, and talking of which, objectively, the Hitbox Crossup, but yeah, mostly preference. So this is the controller I was talking about. I don't have one to hand, but I believe that the alpha versions of the Kickstarter project are going out now. But what's really interesting about this controller, and I've done videos on it before, the Crossup is basically a controller with a D-pad, sort of, on the left side, buttons on the right side, but it also has a second set of D-pad controls on the right side. So things that you would normally do, you'd be like matching up controls on the left and buttons on the right. You can now just like press one control on the left and then press the other control on the right with the action button at the same time. It does make certain things much simpler. The only thing about the Crossup which is kind of difficult is that it only works because on Street Fighter V you're able to use the analog stick and the D-pad at the same time, and they've never patched it out. I don't know why they allow it. Once other games decide that that's going to be like patched out from the start, then does the Crossup have much of a future? Hard to say. This one's good. Donkey Kong Bongos to psych out your opponents. The battle is won before it begins. This man certainly does have the answer. You joke about using bongos to play a fighting game, but you never know. There might come out a controller that does actually make certain things easier. Like, for example, like the dance pad, like the DDR dance pad is clearly a silly controller to be playing fighting games with. But when you think about the fact that you could have foot controls with your feet, and you could also have the second set of D-pad controls on your thumb and all the action buttons on your hand. Basically, you would have access to two separate sets of controllers. You could actually wire up a DDR dance mat to work a little bit like a Crossup. If you wired it up so that you use the analog stick with one hand and the D-pad controls with your feet and the action buttons with your right hand. There's the possibilities. An entire Fighting Mania cabinet. I don't know what Fighting Mania is, but I assume it has something to do with DDR. Okay, let's find out. What is Fighting Mania? What on earth? Oh no, maybe I have seen this in an arcade. So I've just looked this up on Wikipedia, and it looks like a sort of fighting game that you press the directions by actually punching actual punching bags? Or those like practice pads that you use at dojos? Huh. But absolutely, you should bring this controller with you to your next tournament, and if you win, if you win even one round, you deserve to win the whole tournament. Well, I learned something today. Brain. I mean, we joke about brain, but the truth is a number of controllers have actually been coming out in the past year, or like prototypes of controllers have been coming out that allow you to do a certain amount of control using brainwaves. And I think the early experiments were just like, if you're not thinking very hard, then there's like I don't remember what it was. It's like a 10 hertz beta wave or alpha wave or something that you could measure using an not cardiogram, which one is EEG? I can't remember. Electroencephalography. That would actually be really awesome if we could do both. If we could control with our brain, which we already can. I've seen like videos of people having like prosthetic arms that they control using their, brain activity. But if we could also zap the visual information of an MMO into our brains, Sword Art Online, it will happen. The guitar from Guitar Hero. I have actually seen there are videos of people who have used guitar from Guitar Hero to play fighting games. The thing is, it's not exactly the same thing. It's basically holding an arcade stick sideways. Because from the videos I have seen, it's usually someone has replaced like the tapping control, the up-down control with an up-down left-right, putting an actual arcade stick lever in the guitar and then using the action buttons where the frets are on the Guitar Hero controller. I don't think I've actually seen anyone hook it up like a button box controller. I think it would actually be probably even significantly easier if you set up a Guitar Hero controller like this, where you had the direction buttons here on the right like this, and you had the action buttons like this. I can imagine doing a fireball like this. Fireball, Tatsumaki. Can I do a dragon punch? It's hard. I'd say Hitbox Crossup, but I'll always prefer to lose with my Mad Catz TE2 Plus or an Obsidian than to play with a Hitbox. I don't know, it just feels better for me. I mean, I definitely felt the same way about arcade sticks for the first, at least 3 years of doing this channel. No, the first 3 years of playing fighting games on this channel. It was only really 2 or 3 months ago that I first tried using a button box controller like this, and I love it. But there are a number of things that I do find challenging and also, in a way, less joyful than playing with an arcade stick. But that's personal. Some people will find that playing with buttons like digital like this, they'll probably find it more joyful. But then you're asking the question like, are you playing fighting games to have fun? Are you playing fighting games because they're nostalgic? Or are you playing fighting games to win? And remember, the question today is, which controller is the one that you want to use for winning competitions? But then again, if you choose the controller that helps you feel the best, then maybe you will perform at your ultimate potential. Your friend's controller. I don't know. My friend's controller. You say your friend's controller, but when I think about friend's controllers, this is kind of what I remember as a kid, was usually I would play with the main SNES controller over here, and then I would pass this to my friend. I don't know about this specific controller, but there were a number of controllers that weren't they weren't quite as good as the official one. And even then, the official SNES controller, this is not exactly my favorite controller for playing a fighting game with. Where was the one with a slide pad? Look at this thing. Do you remember this thing? I don't think I actually ever played on one of these, but I remember seeing it in the shops and thinking, there is no way there is no way that this is gonna be good. How do you have to like sink your thumb into that little hole there, and then you have to slide it around. Whose idea was this? Who knows? Maybe this was amazing for, I don't know, Pilot Wings or something. Anything with buttons. Well, how about a controller with only buttons? Sorry, I only keep showing you that controller because it's right here on my desk. I haven't got the other ones nearby. Your channel taught me a Hori fighting stick, study the character, learn, train, and good timing. This is the sort of thing your sensei will tell you. It's not about the controller. It's about studying your character, learning and training, and good timing. Rubbish advice. It's all about buying the most expensive controller. DDR Matt, I swear, everyone has the same idea. The best controller is the one you already possess. It's your mind. The best controller is the one you already possess. It's your mind. Except that's not exactly the conversation we're having here. I think what's really interesting about fighting games, what's interesting about music, is that it's not about the theory. Yeah, we could have a theory fight in our minds, and we could all just guess and think about we would do in a certain situation. But what's really interesting about fighting games is that it's a mixture of the mind game, but also the execution. And as the execution starts to go lower and lower and lower, like the execution boundary, as people say, for fighting games. Personally, I mean, I'm pretty down with the modern set of fighting games like Dragon Ball FighterZ, BlazBlue, Cross Tag, Street Fighter V. Honestly, I don't have too much of a problem with the execution barrier being lower than in some of the older retro fighters. But if it were to completely disappear entirely, then I wouldn't find fighting games interesting. For me, yes, the mind games are important, but it's a mixture of the mind games and the physical dexterity and the ability to, practice the motions and actually perform them on cue when you need to, because you've got your like mental stack, and then on top of the mental stack, you've got your like physical ability, and it's just like maybe when the mental stack is full, and you're like, I can't think of anything else, and that's when you make a misinput. Like that can also be quite exciting to watch and see in a tournament. It's just like, whoa, he pushed his opponent so far that they actually like screwed up something like a normal bread and butter combo that they would normally not make a mistake with. I think that aspect is something that I would be sad if we lost too much of that in fighting games. Another vote for the Donkey Kong Bongos with a Dragon Quest slime controller. Hang on a second, you have to see this. This was a controller that I thought this was for PlayStation. Apparently this was a Nintendo Switch controller. Hori made this, but you know what? I wonder if this is actually not that bad. Now, what worries me is that this controller has the D-pad on a slant. So you would have to kind of tilt your hands outward like this for the D-pad to be at the right angle, but it doesn't look like it would be impossible to play. I just don't. I did see it when it came out, but it didn't occur to me that this would actually make for quite a fun live stream or quite a fun video. Maybe we should go and purchase one of these and see if we can play all of our normal fighting games with this. Your mind. A mind controller would be fantastic. But at the same time, it's the fact that there is a barrier between myself and the character. It's like, I'm not the character, I'm sending instructions to the character. And I feel like when I'm using my arcade stick, I feel like I'm in video games, you see people casting magic, it's just like fire, and fire just comes out of their hand. But then there are other kinds of magic where they're like controlling a magical creature. It's like their ability to respect the creature and get respect from that creature, which allows them to get the most out of the fighting abilities from the country. I mean, that's basically what Pokemon is, right? Well, the anime, not the video game. In the video game, you basically just do whatever you want with them. Just make them fight. A lot of people are saying Crossup, but isn't the original Hitbox better in most situations? I thought the whole point of the Crossup is that it's Hitbox for people too used to stick to Switch. From what I've seen on the Hitbox website, the Crossup is being marketed as the controller like that has some hitbox shortcuts, but for people who don't want to leave the arcade stick. But I think there are actually a number of things that you can only do on a Crossup that you can't do on a Hitbox. The truth is, I think as a company though, the way they see the button box layout, they see that as the way forward, and there's not really much need for arcade stick, but the arcade stick is kind of like, okay, well, if you must have an arcade stick, then here's the controller. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure the Crossup can do a number of things that a button box style controller can't do, mostly because you have two D-pads. If legally they could set up some analog control buttons here, so if you were able to set 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons here, which were technically mapped to pushing an analog stick a certain amount, then technically you could have a button box layout controller with 2 sets of D-pads. And then I think that controller would be more powerful than the Crossup. But as it stands, the Crossup would just be like a button box style controller, but with twice as many D-pad controls. So I don't know. Hori Fighting Stick RAP, Silent Blue, and DS4. If your character combo uses a lot of execution on directional buttons, then it's easier to use arcade sticks, Mishimas. I think that's an important point, is that there are some controllers that probably lend themselves better to certain controllers. I remember I was watching a Kamone stream recently, and he was talking about controllers and different controllers being used for Under Night In-Birth. And I remember he was saying like he finds it much easier to play Seth on an arcade stick, but there are some controllers for which the button box style layout is actually probably better for certain characters, like Batista, who is a charge character, and unlike other fighting games, Batista is actually a charge character who can do the opposite of a flash kick. So Guile, you have to hold down hold down for 2 seconds and then press up, or 1 second, whatever. You have to hold down and then press up to do a flash kick. But Batista can also, she can like flash kick, and then once she's in the air, she can also charge by holding up and then press down at a button. And I think characters like that do significantly benefit from the speed of access to being able to switch directions basically immediately on something like a button box style controller. He did mention though, Under Night was not built with those controllers in mind. I'm also curious to hear what their opinion is on button box controllers in the new game that French Bread is making, Melty Blood Type Lumina. I wonder how the design of the game will have been affected by the fact that button box controllers have become much more like widespread in use over the past few years, especially after Daigo brought one of those Gaffer boxes to EVO. He brought it to EVO, right? I can't remember which tournament he was bringing it to, but he brought it to a number of tournaments in America. Foot pedals and a Wiimote. Foot pedals, I can definitely see the benefit of that. Wiimote, I think that's a little bit more arguable. The steering wheel. I mean, there was someone who did show up to a tournament with a steering wheel, but I want to see someone actually playing by pressing right by turning right and pressing left by turning left. Mixboxes. Someone has made their own Mixbox by modifying. I've got one of these. I've got basically the exact same controller right here, but I don't have it modified to be a Mixbox. That's fascinating. This person's put a Wazard controller into their Quanba drone here. This was a nice looking little product here, the BlazBlue cross tag. It's just the art. Whoever the artist was for the BlazBlue cross tag, when BlazBlue cross tag came out, I was like, this stuff looks so good. Sideways Joy-Con. If you are not a Nintendo Switch player, what you might not know is that the Nintendo Switch has, obviously a couple of these that you slap onto the side of the Nintendo Switch. But when you want to play multiplayer, you put them sideways, and now you both have access to a D-pad and buttons. But please don't play your fighting games on this. I like the Fightboard MX, but it's personal choice. I have never seen this. This basically looks like a keybox. Did they ever release that controller? I remember Keybox was talking about making a controller with WASD on the left and keyboard keys on the right. The only thing about these keyboard controllers that I find confusing is that by using keyboard keys, the only thing you really do with the button box layout on the right side, I'm talking about the action buttons, is that now you can't really double tap them. I mean, yeah, it looks cool because you can use key switches, but at the same time, it's basically the same as using this, but now you can't double tap. So personally, I mean, although this controller here looks really cool, I would prefer to be able to double tap if I need to, but like, can you imagine trying to double tap on that top row of buttons? The WASD layout, though, I can see reasons why you might want a WASD layout. Whatever Daigo used at EVO Moment 37, I actually don't know what controller he used at EVO Moment 37. Don't at me. What is this? I am not sure what we're looking at here. It says high frequency, so I want to think that this was some kind of wireless controller, but as you can see, there's very much a wire connected to it. It was for the N64, and it looks average. It just looks like, again, like the controller that you would pass to your friend. This is a trick question. Of course it's a trick question. It's on Twitter. Everything's a trick question on Twitter. Whichever one makes your opponent feel bad about losing. Yes! Yes, get that salt going. I like the limited edition Sanrio versus Street Fighter stick. Oh, I remember. I think that's the one, a Sanrio with all the Hello Kitty characters on an arcade stick. I don't know who made the actual stick. Was it Mad Catz? Well, there you go, everyone. A completely unserious discussion. Just wanted to quickly ask the question completely randomly just to see what kind of answers that people would come up with on Twitter. What is the best controller for winning fighting games? And at the moment, what's happened with fighting games is, they started in arcades, so we had to use arcade sticks, and then when we went to console, we all went to the pad because we didn't have great arcade sticks that we could use at home, and then great arcade sticks at home finally became a thing, and so now we have arcade sticks again, so people are using both now. We're using pad controllers and using arcade sticks, and then controllers came out like this, and the thing is, this controller does make certain things possible that you literally simply cannot do on a controller like this. Mostly because you can't actually press both left and right at the same time. And you can't press down and up at the same time on this controller. And even though there are controllers that sometimes allow you to press both of the controllers at the same time, so things like the Razer Ryon, which I talked about in a previous video, one of the things that I found that made it a little difficult for me to use was the fact that when you push it in the middle, it presses all the buttons simultaneously, and that can create a large amount of confusion, whereas a controller that's actually designed to do that, like in the chip, in the Brook wireless, the Brook Universal Fighting Board in this stick, it has rules set out so that if you press down and you press jump at the same time, it will just continuously input up instead of like pressing nothing at all, like neutral. But you can actually use that to your advantage to actually create a number of shortcuts that do things faster than any other controller out there would allow you to do. Certain things like being able to dash forward while you're already walking forward. There's a whole world out there about the shortcuts that you can take advantage on button box style controllers, or things like the Crossup that's coming out soon. Although I don't think it's a simple matter of switching over to a button box and instantly winning. Like, you do have to learn how to do stuff with your left hand that you may have never done before, especially with your ring finger. Like, when the first thing I noticed when I picked up a controller like this was like, okay, I do play piano and play the guitar, and so I think my ring finger is all right, but there are certain motions that I don't have the muscle memory down for, and it's taken me quite a while to get used to doing things like a dragon punch motion on the two-player side using a button box style controller. So it will take time. It's not instantly you buy the controller and you start winning, but there are certainly advantages and things that you can do on this controller which are significantly faster and easier than using an arcade stick. Simply because, like, when you use an arcade stick, if you aim right but you go a little bit too high, you might miss and actually end up with a jump input, and that happens to me all the time. And I'm certain that a number of casual players also feel the same thing. And like, I know that a lot of people who come to this channel like asking like, what's a good controller? A lot of people say in the comments, they're like, I just couldn't get along with the arcade stick because I couldn't get the inputs right. Like, every time I tried to press a certain direction, I would get like a different direction. It's because it's wishy-washy. A controller like an analog stick, you go for one, but you could accidentally push a few degrees up and end up with a completely different direction. When you're pressing on the D-pad, or you're pressing on something like a button box controller, you can't. you would have to really, really mess up to not press forward. If you tried to press forward and you missed and you press down instead, like it's not quite the same as, you missed. You were trying to press right on an analog stick and you kind of missed. You would have to take your hand off the controller and press down into the wrong button. And okay, to be honest, with a controller like this, I do hover my hands over them instead of resting my hands on the button, but still, you're unlikely to miss between here and here. You're unlikely to miss. But it does bring with it a large number of other challenges. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not here to talk about all the intricacies of button box controllers and cross-ups and, WASD controllers, Mixboxes and analog sticks and arcade sticks. Just wanted to ask a silly question. What's the best controller for winning fighting games? And the answer, drumroll please, is of course the controller that you're most comfortable with. But keep in mind that a number of controllers are coming out with a large number of shortcuts that you might want to take advantage of, and who knows? Controllers out there that you had maybe never considered might well actually be the most comfortable controller for you, but maybe you just haven't tried it yet. So try them out, whether it's a D-pad or a Joy-Con or a button box or an arcade stick, or maybe you want to play with the music controller, which is designed for Project Diva Arcade. Who knows? Maybe that's the right controller for you. If you have an opinion on what the best controller is for winning fighting games, let me know in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, join us on Discord where you can chat about gear and fighting games and Japan and just whatever you want to talk about on Discord. And until the next NihongoGamer video, I'll see you around.